Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. Sometimes we read passages of Scripture, and in our hurry, we blow right past important details that seem of little importance to us. We ignore the cities with difficult to pronounce names and the people who seem little more than obscure characters in the storyline. And when we do, we miss the rich detail that God has provided in His Word. In Joshua chapter 8, verses 3 through 29, the people of Israel are going to get a second chance to do battle with the people of Ai. And while that fact is important, what's even more important is that this city holds important significance for the nation of Israel. It's not just another city among many that the Israelites have to conquer and possess. And there's another city mentioned in this passage that carries special significance as well, the city of Bethel. As we're going to see, these two cities and their history are critical to understanding all that is going to happen in this passage. So rather than hurry through the story and rush to the details of the battle itself, let's take time to see what we can learn about the unfailing promise of God. Before we take a look at the second battle for the capture of Ai, it's important that we recognize the significance of this particular region of the land. We know that Ai is the city Joshua intends to attack, but the text also mentions Bethel. Bethel was a nearby city that had evidently formed some kind of alliance with Ai, agreeing to come to their aid in the event of an attack by enemy forces. Soldiers from Bethel were part of the army that will attack the Israelites in an attempt to rout them a second time. But why is this important? These two cities play an important role in the history of Israel. They provide direct ties all the way back to the days of Abraham, the father of the Hebrew people. Abraham, then known as Abram, had been called by God out of his hometown of Ur and sent to the land of Canaan, which God had promised as his inheritance. And when Abraham had arrived in the land, he came to the very location where Joshua and his troops were about to do battle. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Genesis 12, verse 8. Abraham had built an altar to God on this very spot, but due to a famine in the land, Abraham was forced to flee to Egypt. In time he returned, a very rich and prosperous man, and he came back to the same spot. And he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. Genesis 13, verses 3 through 4. Many years later, Jacob, one of the grandsons of Abraham, would find himself in this very same place. He was on his way to a place called Paddan Aram, sent by his father Isaac in order to escape the wrath of his brother Esau. Jacob, with the help of his mother, had tricked Isaac into giving him the blessing of the firstborn, rightfully belonging to Esau. Having robbed Esau of his birthright, Jacob was forced to live with his uncle. And yet, in spite of his use of deceit to get what was not rightfully his, God appeared to Jacob in a dream and spoke to him. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Genesis 28, verses 13 through 15. God promised to give Jacob the very land on which he was camped. Not only had God reaffirmed the promise made to Abraham many years earlier, he had reconfirmed it with Jacob, the son of Isaac. And Jacob ended up creating a memorial on the very spot on which he had the vision, calling it Bethel. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel. Genesis 28, verses 18 through 19. So this location held significant meaning for the people of Israel. After 400 years in captivity and 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, they were standing at the very spot where their forefathers had built an altar and a memorial to God. This land was theirs by right, according to the promise of God. Ai and Bethel were not just two arbitrary cities that happened to stand in the way of Israel's conquest of the land. They were important landmarks that provided a link to Israel's past and a reminder of God's covenant promise to make of them a great nation and to provide for them a land. Back to the battle. This time Joshua was careful to do things God's way. They had removed the sin from their midst, having stoned Achan and his family for his crime of disobeying God's ban on taking plunder from Jericho. Now they could move ahead with God's battle plan for taking Ai. It involved a bit of subterfuge, taking advantage of the overconfidence of the people of Ai, since they had easily routed the Israelites in their first confrontation. But this time Joshua divided his army up, sending a portion of his troops to wait in ambush on the other side of the city, while he and the rest of his force marched towards the city, as if to attack it a second time. The plan was simple. They would draw out the forces from Ai, and then feign a retreat as soon as the enemy exited the walls of the city. This would allow the troops in hiding to enter its open gates and capture the city. They would then set fires that acted as a signal to Joshua and his troops, who then would turn on the men of Ai and Bethel. Surprised by the sudden display of aggression on the part of the Israelites, and seeing the smoke rising out of their city, the men of Ai and their allies from Bethel lost heart and were completely annihilated. Not a man was left alive, and the city fell that day, with every single citizen put to the sword. As grim and gruesome as this scene appears to our modern sensibilities, we must not overlook that this entire affair was according to the will of God. He had clearly told Joshua, "Stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand." Joshua 8, verse 18. God had promised to give the land on which Ai sat as an inheritance to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now God had promised to give the city of Ai to Joshua. Do not fear and do not be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you, and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, and his people, his city, and his land. Joshua 8, verse 1. God knew that the removal of the inhabitants of the land was critical if the people of Israel were going to remain pure and totally dedicated to God. God had warned Moses not to make alliances with the people of the land, because he knew what would happen if they did. Take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Asherim, for you shall worship no other God. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they whore after their gods, and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, you eat of his sacrifice, and you take of their daughters for your sons, and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. Exodus 34, verses 12 through 16. And we'll see that in time the people of Israel will fail to consistently keep this command of God. As the book of Joshua unfolds, we'll witness the Israelites disobeying the will of God and choosing to spare the inhabitants of the land. They will make compromises and concessions, even intermarrying with the Canaanites, Amorites, and other people groups. And as a result, they'll find themselves worshiping their false gods. But the Battle of Ai was a rousing success. God gave them the victory, just as he had at Jericho. They had been obedient, and God had blessed. And God had been faithful to the promises he had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The question is, will the people of Israel be faithful to God?